Hello students, in this lecture we will begin with the first chapter of your syllabus, which is matter in our surroundings. As the name of the chapter suggests, that in this chapter we will be studying about the matter that is present around us. So you must have noticed that in front of you you have a chair, you have a book, you have a table. All of these substances are made up of something, and in sense of chemistry, according to scientists, we call that substance as matter. Everything around you, be it a book, be it a table or a chair or a pen or food you eat or the atmosphere, which is made up of gases, everything around you is made up of matter. This is what we are going to study in this chapter. So in our daily life, we come across so many substances. They have different shapes, sizes, textures. As you can see, that milk is a liquid that has a different texture altogether. And you have a book or you have an iron rod. They have a different set of properties. So this way we can say that there are a lot of substances present, and each of them is made up of some certain kind of material. Whatever kind it is, we call it as matter only. Everything around you is made up of matter. So we can say that anything that has mass and occupies space is considered as matter. How can you say that? That if you take a book and you place it somewhere, so that book will occupy some space on the table or wherever you are putting it, and also it will occupy some volume. So you can say that this is a matter. Now for gases, for instance, you have a gas, take oxygen gas for example. In an oxygen cylinder you put oxygen gas. That gas is occupying some volume and has mass also, so that is also a matter. So our atmosphere is made up of gases, though they are invisible, but they are also considered as matter, right? So we'll be starting with the first topic, which is basically matter and its classification. We discussed the two characteristics of matter, which are that it occupies space and has mass, which are written here also, and we will be discussing these two in detail now. So students, matter and its classification. How do we classify matter? We will be discussing this later on. Firstly, let us read this in detail, that how do we say that matter occupies space? How can you relate it to yourself in the daily life? So students, it must be kept in mind that everything which we perceive with our senses is not matter, which means that sometimes you have feelings, you have emotions, you have different feelings. You cannot consider them as matter, correct? Your emotions, your anger, they cannot be considered as matter. For example, you have the perception of joy, you feel heat, you feel a cold substance. That heat or that cold substance, or the cold substance, the temperature that cold substance provides you is not matter. You cannot consider temperature as a matter because it is not something that has mass or occupies space. You can only talk about the substances which have mass and occupy space. So heat, light and electricity are the forms of energy that do not have mass or volume. So they are not considered as matter. You have different substances such as air, water, coal, petroleum, or any other substances that you see in front of you, such as metals, different metals such as copper, iron, zinc, gold, silver, mercury, wood, ice. All these substances are matter because they occupy some space, right? That is why we call them as matter. The space taken up by all material bodies is not same though. You cannot say that your pen and book will occupy same space. They occupy different spaces, but they occupy a significant space, so we call it as matter. I just told you the example of book and pen. So students, the amount of space occupied by a body is called as volume. For example, you have a book. This is the book. It occupies some space in front of you, right? So this space that it is occupying on the table is known as its volume, right? To show that matter occupies space, let us consider a few examples, correct? So when you place a science book on the table or any book, for that matter, your chemistry book, let's say, if you put your chemistry book on the table, can you place anything else in the space occupied by the book? For example, you have put anything. You can see this pen. If you put this pen anywhere, you cannot put another substance in the same space. You will have to replace the pen and then put something else, correct? So we cannot put anything else in that space, hence we can say that the book is occupying some space. This pen was also occupying some space, which is why we could not put something else in the same space. Now take a glass completely filled with water. You have a glass which is completely filled. Now, can you put any other liquid or any other substance in the same amount of space? No, you cannot. You will have to remove some water so as to fit something else into the glass, right? This is because the water had occupied all the space. So, to fit something else into the substance, you cannot do that until you remove water, correct? If you now third example, first you saw for solids, secondly you saw for liquids, the example with the glass. Now for gases, what example can you think of for the in the context of gases? You have a balloon, correct? You have a balloon. You fill this balloon with air. You have already filled this with air. Now can you put something else in the balloon? You have fully blown the balloon. It cannot you cannot add any more air to it, which means you have filled it with the air completely up to the level of its volume. You cannot add any more air until you remove some air and then add something else. You will have to remove some of the air so as to add any other substance to the balloon. So you can say that air itself also occupies some space, which means that air, which is made up of different gases, is also matter and it also occupies space, correct? Now students, the second thing about matter that I talked about was that matter has some mass. Now where did this come from? How do you say that a body has a mass? Then only it can be called a matter. How? The amount of matter contained in a body is called mass. What is mass? Amount of matter contained in a body. Amount of matter. We are discussing about the quantity of the matter, correct? Now, how do you measure your mass? You can measure your mass by standing on a weighing machine, right? So that weighing machine is an example of a physical balance. A physical balance tells you about your weight, your mass, correct? So, all solids have mass. You can simply take a book again, for example. You have a book, you take the book in your hand, you can notice that it has some weight. You have to apply some force in order to keep that book in your hand. You cannot just loosen your hand, because if you loosen your hand, the book will fall down, which means that you are applying some force, which is why you can hold the book. That force is equal to the mass of the book, correct? So the book has some mass, which is why we call it matter. If you place a stone or a piece of wood on one branch of the physical balance, you have a physical balance, for example, correct? This is the physical balance. On this side, on any one of the side, you put wood, or you can take a wooden piece on this side of the balance. This is wood, correct? Now, what will you notice? If you put one wooden block on one side of the balance, you will see that this side of the balance goes down. How will it look like? The balance will look like tilted. It will become this. It will look like this somehow, that this side will rise up and this side will go down. Why is that? Because the wood has some mass, which is why the balance tilts and one of the sides which has the wooden block comes towards the earth due to the gravitational force, correct? So we can easily say that substances have mass and they occupy space, which we already talked about, that wooden block will also occupy some space, correct? Now students, similarly, if you have two beakers, you have two beakers. Now what? In one of the beakers, you take some liquid. You add water to it. Correct. The other beaker is empty. Now again, you take a physical balance. What do you do after you take the physical balance? You have a balance. Now, in one side of the balance, you put the filled beaker. You have the filled beaker this side with the water, and the empty beaker this side. It has no water in it. So what is supposed to happen? The physical balance will tilt again and this side will go down, because the water that you've put in the beaker has some mass. The beakers have equal mass, obviously. Empty beakers have equal mass. We already know that. But then you added water to one of the beakers and you put that beaker on the left side of the balance. Now the left side of the balance will come down because it has some water in it, which will be pulled towards the earth due to the gravitational force. Correct? So we can easily say that the liquid that we put in also has some mass. Now for third instance, you have already seen the example of a solid, which was a book. Then you was a wooden block. Then you saw the example of water, which is a liquid. Now in case of air, what do you say? What do you think should happen? You take two balloons. One is inflated and the other one is not inflated. You have a normal balloon which has not been inflated, and you have one balloon in which you have blown air. Correct? You have two balloons. Now this balloon has air into it, while this balloon is empty. It has no air inside it. Now if you put these two in the balance, the side on which you have put the filled balloon will come down, will be pulled towards the earth. This is because this balloon has the mass of its own, is its own mass of the balloon, and the mass of air, while this balloon only had the mass of balloon. So obviously the mass of the filled balloon is greater than the mass of the empty balloon. So this side, the balance having the filled balloon on its side, will come down. So we can easily say that gas also has some mass. Although gases are very light, they have very less mass compared to liquids and solids, but they still have considerable mass. So we can say that substances which have the matter that can occupy space and has some mass, the substances which can occupy space and have some mass are only called matter. You cannot consider your feelings, your joy, your perception, your heat, cold, or any other feeling as a matter. The substance that can be called as matter, we discussed a lot of examples of it. Correct? So students, the classification that we see about matter is that matter can be classified in two ways. The first one is based on physical properties. What are the physical properties? Physical properties are boiling point, melting point, volume, mass. These are the physical properties. So what is the classification? On the basis of physical properties, you can classify matter into three classes, which is solid, liquid, and gas. Example of solid, you have a book, you have stone, correct, you have pen, all of this is solid. Then you have for liquid, you can write the names of metals, for example, iron, zinc, all of these are solids. For liquid, you have milk, correct, you have juice, you have water, all of this is liquid. Now thirdly, you have gases, which are nitrogen, oxygen, hydrogen. These are all classification based on physical properties. For chemical classification, the properties we consider are chemical properties. So on the basis of chemical properties, we classify the matter into three classes again: elements, compounds, and mixtures. Now elements and compounds both are pure form of matter. This is the impure form of matter, which you will be studying in detail further in higher classes. These are the two pure classes, and this is the impure class of the chemical classification of matter. Correct? So in this lecture we discussed what all substances can be called as matter and what we cannot consider as matter. The main two properties important are that matter occupies some space and has mass, and we saw the classification at the end. So in the next lecture we will be discussing the physical nature of matter. Thank you for your attention, students.